Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging into a truly extraordinary moment in the Russia-Ukraine conflict from late May 2025. The sources you've brought together for us paint a picture of two completely contradictory events happening almost side by side.
Yeah, it's really something.
On one hand, you have the largest prisoner exchange we've seen since the full-scale invasion began.
A huge step, seemingly.
And then on the other hand, a massive punishing attack right here on the capital, Kyiv, almost simultaneously.
It's a striking paradox, isn't it? A moment of significant, humanitarian progress and negotiation.
Right.
Running concurrently with a major escalation of violence. So our goal in this deep dive is to pull the key details from your sources, understand the specifics of both the exchange and the attack, and really grapple with what this stark contrast tells us about the current dynamics of this conflict.
Okay, let's unpack this. We should probably start with the element of cooperation, rare as it is. The sources describe this as the largest prisoner swap since the war began in 2014, but specifically since the full-scale invasion in February 2022.
Right, that's an important distinction.
And what's particularly interesting, I think, is that the groundwork for this wasn't laid quietly. The agreement actually came out of direct talks in Istanbul.
Yeah, on May 16th. And that's significant because those were the first time Moscow and Kyiv had sat down face-to-face like that since, 2022?
Exactly, since 2022. So it wasn't just back-channel whispers.
No. This was a tangible outcome from a formal negotiation.
Yeah.
And the sources indicated a significant planned scope, too.
Which was?
A massive 1,000 for 1,000 swap, intended to happen over several days, specifically May 23rd to the 25th.
1,000 people on each side. Wow. Okay, and the first concrete steps were taken on May 23rd.
That's right. The sources tell us 390 prisoners were exchanged by each side that day.
Okay, 390. And the breakdown.
Ukraine received 270 soldiers and 120 civilians. Russia also got 270 soldiers and 120 civilians. So perfectly balanced for that first phase.
A balanced first step. And then phase 2.
Followed rapidly on May 24th. Another 307 prisoners exchanged by each side.
Okay, so 390 plus 307, that makes 697 each by the end of the 24th.
Exactly. 697 individuals returned to each side. A huge undertaking, as you said.
But beyond the numbers, what really resonates in the sources I found are the deeply human stories of these returns.
Absolutely.
You read about the scene, released soldiers arriving, many draped in Ukrainian flags, while families waited, anxiously shouting out names, just desperate for any sign or news.
The emotions must have been incredibly raw. The sources mentioned tears, shouts of pure relief like, thank you.
And glory to Ukraine, that defiant cry.
Yeah. And the sources give us some specific glimpses into those personal experiences. There's Anton Kovalnik, for instance.
His story stood out.
Captured way back in April 2022 at Azovmash in Mariupol. That's, that large industrial plant that saw such heavy fighting.
Right.
He spent over 3 years in captivity. Described it as taking a heavy psychological and physical toll.
I can only imagine.
In his first call home to his mother in Pavlorad in the Dnipropetrovsk region. Incredibly simple and powerful. Just, it's okay, Mom, I'm home. The most important thing is that I'm in Ukraine.
Wow. Wow. And the family's waiting. The sources mention Maria Barkova.
Yes, she'd been waiting 4 years for her Marine brother. Never missed a swap event, apparently.
4 years.
And she found new hope specifically in the sheer scale of this plan. The 1,000 for 1,001.
And her family situation highlights the wider complexities, doesn't it? Her parents are under Russian occupation.
Right. And another brother, who is a cancer patient, is also still waiting to be returned. It's just layers upon layers.
Then there was Inna Sokarina, waiting 37 months for her Marine son.
Yeah, she hadn't come to previous swaps, but this large-scale one felt different to her. She said it was a sign.
A sign. And the timing was significant for her, too.
She noted May 23rd was Marine Corps Day in Ukraine. So, yeah, deeply symbolic for her.
And the soldier, Kostiantin, his account was quite moving.
After 21 months in captivity, he spoke about his hands trembling as he held photos of those still captive. Photos given to him by their relatives.
Even in his own freedom, carrying that weight.
Yeah, his voice, described in the sources, was filled with both sadness and gratitude. He talked about the difficulty even recognizing people who had changed so much during their time away.
That's chilling.
And he hadn't even called his family yet. Said he needed time to process everything first. It really underlines the profound and lasting impact of being held for so long.
Definitely. And one more, Viktor Savek.
Ah, yes, 58 years old. Captured in Mariupol, held for 37 months and 12 days.
A very specific count.
It probably felt like every single one of those days. He described his homecoming as impossible to describe, very joyful. Just an overwhelming feeling after such a long ordeal.
These personal accounts, they're vital, aren't they, for understanding the human state?
Absolutely crucial, beyond the politics and the numbers.
Okay, stepping back a bit. The sources also give us broader context on captivity. Ukrainian officials estimate Russia holds at least 8,000 Ukrainian service members.
At least 8,000, yeah. That's the estimate mentioned. And the situation regarding civilians is described as even more complex and, frankly, troubling.
How so?
According to the Ukrainian ombudsman, that's the official tasked with protecting human rights, at least 16,000 Ukrainian civilians are illegally detained by Russia.
16,000 civilians?
Yeah. And what's particularly concerning, the sources note, is that apparently only 174 have been returned so far.
Only 174 out of 16,000 plus?
That's what the source states. The ombudsman calls this a clear violation of the Geneva Conventions, the international treaties on humanitarian treatment in war.
Right.
And highlights that international law doesn't seem to fully address or, well, prevent Russia's continued practice of detaining civilians like this.
That's a major point. The sources also bring up Ukrainian journalists being held.
Yes, citing at least 31 illegally detained. A Ukrainian representative at the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, spoke about fabricated charges being used, harsh conditions, alleged torture.
Grim.
And the broader cost is mentioned too, 103 media workers killed during the full-scale invasion. There's also a particularly grim detail in the sources about the return of journalist Victoria Rushtina's body. An investigation allegedly found signs of torture and missing organs.
Just horrific. And there's also the issue of the children.
Yes, the forcible deportation of Ukrainian children. Ukrainian government data, cited in the sources, suggests over 19,500 children have been deported, mostly to Russia, Belarus, or Russian-occupied areas.
And how many returned?
Only around 1,300, according to the data provided. The sources state these children are placed in families or camps, reportedly subjected to intense anti-Ukrainian propaganda, sometimes even military training.
This led to international action, didn't it?
It did. The sources mentioned the International Criminal Court, the ICC, issuing arrest warrants for President Putin and the Children's Rights Commissioner Maria Lvova-Belova over this.
Right.
And the European Parliament also passed a resolution condemning it as a genocidal strategy. We have to present these accounts and official responses as they appear in the sources, of course.
Of course.
Right.
Maintaining impartiality. Okay, shifting back to the diplomatic side of the swap itself. President Zelensky apparently called the Istanbul Agreement the only real result of that meeting.
Yes, that quote is in the sources. And diplomatic representatives from Nordic and Baltic countries were reportedly involved in the preparations, helping facilitate the exchange.
So some international involvement there.
Seems so. And a Ukrainian official suggested that if this 1,000 for 1,000 exchange is fully completed, it could potentially open the door for future direct talks. A bit of cautious optimism, maybe?
Maybe. And what about wider international reaction?
Well, the sources note U.S. President Trump welcomed the exchange, commenting it could lead to something big. Meanwhile, on the Russian side, Foreign Minister Lavrov stated that Russia intended to send Ukraine its terms for a peace settlement only after the swap was completed.
So a condition attached. Even this positive step was framed with an ongoing diplomatic maneuvering.
Exactly, framing it within their own conditions and timeline.
Okay, now, here is the moment where the picture the sources paint takes that sharp, almost, jarring turn.
Yeah, the whiplash.
Just hours after that first group of 390 prisoners came home on May 23rd, Kyiv was hit hard. A massive Russian missile and drone attack overnight into May 24th.
And the sources really emphasized the scale, calling it one of the biggest combined missile and drone attacks on the capital since the war began.
Combined meaning both types used together.
Yes. Ukraine's Air Force reported Russia launched 14 ballistic missiles and 250 Shahed-type attack drones nationwide. Shaheds are those relatively low-cost, Iranian-designed explosive drones Russia uses extensively.
250 drones, that's a huge number. What about interceptions?
Ukrainian forces reported intercepting 6 of those ballistic missiles, the ones specifically targeting Kyiv. And they reported dealing with 245 of the Shahed drones.
Almost all of them. How?
Well, 128 were reported shot down, and 117 were reported as neutralized electronically.
Which means?
Likely disabled through jamming or other electronic countermeasures, rather than being physically shot down. Still taken out of action.
Okay. But even with that high interception rate, the impact, it was still severe.
Very much so, according to the sources. At least 15 civilians injured reported in Kyiv itself. One source specified 15 in the city, 2 more in the surrounding region. Another just said more than a dozen.
Any fatalities in Kyiv?
The sources focus on injuries in Kyiv, mentioning 6 people needing medical care in the Solomiansky district. But tragically,
yes.
The sources note the attacks weren't confined to the capital area. 5 civilians were reported killed in Russian strikes in the Kharkiv and Donetsk regions around the same time.
So, fatalities elsewhere. And in Kyiv, the physical damage from falling debris was widespread.
Yes. Multiple residential buildings, cars, businesses hit. Debris and resulting fires reported across 6 different districts.
6 districts.
The Avalon district seemed to be particularly hard hit, with drone debris falling directly on a shopping mall and a residential building there.
A shopping mall. And we have witness accounts.
We do. Yuri Bondarchuk, for example. He described hearing the air raid siren, which, by the way, lasted for over 7 hours in Kyiv that night.
7 hours.
Then the buzzing sound of the drones, then loud boom, shattered glass. The damage to his apartment. He said his balcony, windows, and doors were totally wiped out.
Totally wiped out. The image included in the sources, that damaged apartment building at night, it really drives home that reality.
It does. A visual confirmation of the destruction.
Now, it's important for balance. The sources also mention Russia reporting Ukrainian drone attacks on its territory around the same time.
Yes. Roughly May 20th to 23rd, Russia claimed Ukraine launched 788 drones and missiles. They reported shooting down dozens, targeting Moscow. There was also a specific reported Ukrainian strike on the energy factory in Russia's Lipetsk Oblast on May 23rd.
What's significant about that factory?
The sources state this factory allegedly produces parts for Iskander missiles. Those are ballistic missiles and glide bombs, as well as batteries. It's also noted as being under U.S. and EU sanctions.
Right, and the sources speculated on the impact.
They highlighted the potential strategic impact if it were shut down. It's crucial to include these reports from both sides, as presented in the sources, to understand the context of strikes and counterstrikes happening concurrently.
Agreed. Now, the reactions to the Kyiv attack, described in the sources, they really highlight that contrast we talked about.
Immediately, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Sybiha directly called the attack Russia's response to international peace efforts.
Explicitly linking it.
Yes, and contrasting it with the peace memorandum discussed in Istanbul that never materialized. He stated, instead, Russia sends deadly drones and missiles at civilians, a very direct accusation.
And President Zelensky's reaction.
As reported, he said, with each such attack, the world becomes more certain that the cause of prolonging the war lies in Moscow.
Using it to build an argument.
And specifically to push for more sanctions, arguing that only additional pressure on key sectors of Russia's economy would force Moscow to cease fire. He had also reportedly called Russia's delay on signing a peace memorandum a mockery of the whole world previously.
Strong words. What about international officials?
Also strong reactions cited in the sources. Estonia's foreign minister, Margus Tsahkna, suggested Russia's aggression hasn't faced enough pressure. He called for increased military aid to Ukraine, tougher sanctions.
Specifically targeting
Russia's shadow oil fleet and frozen assets, getting very specific on economic levers.
Okay. And the EU ambassador.
Katerina Mathernova described the attack as horrific and said it made it clear that Russia's intention is for the war to continue. Pretty blunt.
And the G7.
Also reported as threatening further sanctions if Russia doesn't agree to a ceasefire. So linking economic pressure directly to military actions again.
And all these reactions, they tie back into the context of those recent Istanbul talks we mentioned earlier.
Exactly. The sources highlight the failure to reach a ceasefire agreement there. Moscow's stated conditions for peace, which include withdrawal from 4 Ukrainian regions they claim to have annexed.
A non-starter for Kyiv.
Precisely. And the view among Ukrainian officials, reported in the sources, was that the Russian delegation lacked real authority or, well, willingness for substantive peace discussions anyway.
So let's try and pull this together, synthesize it.
Right.
What does it really mean when the largest exchange of prisoners, a moment built on direct talks, cooperation happens within hours of one of the biggest missile assaults on the capital?
It illustrates something fundamental and, frankly, bewildering about this conflict, doesn't it?
It really does.
It shows that specific, limited forms of cooperation, particularly on humanitarian issues like getting people home, can happen. The mechanisms, the willingness, it exists for that kind of negotiation.
Right.
But, as the sources clearly show, this doesn't necessarily translate into any broader de-escalation or any movement towards ending the violence itself. The two things seem to exist on parallel tracks or maybe even in opposition.
Exactly. The human stories of homecoming, the relief from the swap section, they stand in incredibly sharp contrast to the new civilian casualties, the shattered glass, the sheer destruction we heard about from the Kyiv attack just hours later.
It's a vivid, immediate demonstration of the war's dual reality. Limited tactical agreements on one hand, and constant brutal violence targeting civilians on the other. It's happening at the same time.
And it highlights how the diplomatic efforts, like those Istanbul talks or the calls for sanctions we discussed, they're not happening in a vacuum, are they?
Not at all. They're happening alongside intense military action. The attack wasn't just random. In the eyes of Ukrainian officials reported in the sources, it was directly framed as a counterpoint. Perhaps even a calculated response to any perceived momentum towards peace from the swap or the talks.
Undermining any sense of progress.
Potentially. This period, late May 2025, as captured in these sources, it just crystallizes the current state, perhaps. A stalemate where small, specific points of understanding or humanitarian agreement are possible, but where any movement towards ending the core conflict remains deeply resistant and often seems to be met with, well, escalated violence.
So we've dived into the sources covering this extraordinary moment, the hope and relief of the largest prisoner exchange colliding head-on with the terror and destruction of a major attack on Kyiv.
It's a powerful, if difficult, reminder of the complex and often contradictory realities at play in this war, just side by side.
Okay, here's a final thought for you, our listener, to consider pulling directly from the tension revealed in these sources. Perhaps these events show that in this particular conflict, maybe the smallest, most precious steps towards peace, like bringing people home, might only be possible within the ongoing harsh reality of war. Like they can coexist but not influence each other much.
Or is there something more strategic? Could limited cooperation sometimes even serve as a prelude to escalation, a signal, a way to test reactions before acting more aggressively?
What does this pattern, this juxtaposition, what does it suggest about what approaches, diplomatic or otherwise, might genuinely move things forward? Or are we stuck in this cycle?
It definitely leaves you questioning the very nature of negotiation and conflict in this specific context. A lot to think about.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the complexities these sources have revealed today.